Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 20th of May, 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Well, we need to start off with Assange, because quite a lot of stuff going on around Julian Assange at the moment, Patrick. The Sweden thing, as we predicted, seems to be raising its head again.
Well, as people would have seen a couple of days ago, Sweden has issued a request to detain Julian Assange in absentia, and whether they are able to get that through or not, we'll see. It looks like they might. If they do, then that would trigger a European arrest warrant, whereby Julian Assange would then be eligible to be extradited from the UK to Sweden to face allegations of sexual misconduct, sexual assault, or rape. We're not sure what the official investigation is because it hasn't gone that far yet, but the media have already taken it to be a rape case. Okay, so we just want to remind everybody that this investigation was twice mounted and twice dropped by two different prosecutors, so most recently in 2016. So there were two separate complaints, one of which lapsed, and in I believe, I think it was possibly 2013 or something around there, and the other in 2017. So there's the third time they've revised the case. And it's a lot of people believe this is extremely politicized.
So as you say, the headline's full of the word rape. They do say investigation. There are no charges at this point in time, but this could result in a European arrest warrant, as you say. Now, what was Eva Marie Persson saying?
Well, she's the deputy chief prosecutor and the Swedish prosecutor. She's saying that there's a request for him to be detained in absentia. So if granted, the court will order the first step, so the process would begin for extradition of Britain. So here's the important point about this, is, Mike, that if it's still an investigation, he hasn't been charged yet. If it's investigation, then again, they could send somebody to interview him in Belmarsh prison. He's already detained in a supermax prison in southeast London. So this looks like it's kind of a continuation of the theater, the legal theater, or the illusion of justice or due process that we saw over the last 8 years. That's what it looks like. So there's no new evidence. They're not acting on any new evidence. There's already been an investigation into the complaints that's twice dropped for lack of credible evidence, but also unreliable witness testimonies, and possibly some misconduct on the part of the accuser's lawyers, who leaked Assange's name to the tabloids immediately when the complaint was made to the police. So there's that, plus the selling of the story to the offers to sell their stories to the tabloids. That was also part of this, and also the police were accused of trumping up the charges when one of the victims, Mike, said that she didn't want him charged with any crimes. So again, this looks like they're buying time. Britain would like to offload the case to Sweden. This would be politically convenient for the UK, because then they wouldn't have the sort of dirt on their hands of handing him over to the United States for what looks like an unlawful trial. So there's that, and also to give the U.S. time to maybe create new charges. And where would they get the evidence for these new charges?
Well, of course, this is the other major thing that's going on this morning. It's going on as we speak. The headline in Newsweek: Ecuador to give U.S. Julian Assange documents, possessions left behind in London embassy. Of course, it's not the United States that are coming to collect those documents, though.
No, these are, right now, as we speak, there's a whole press corps outside of the Ecuadorian embassy in Belgravia, and they're waiting. What they're waiting for, Mike, are officials from Quito, from Ecuador, who are going to come and take Julian Assange's laptops, cell phones, memory sticks, including 2 manuscripts That's believed to be possibly his memoirs or book he was working on, plus his medical records, and then they would hand those over to the United States to do as they wish, basically. And the U.S. is basically using Ecuador to sort of do the deed, and then they're going to hand over these to the United States authorities, and then the U.S. can use those and see if they can extrapolate some evidence out of Assange's possessions in order to charge him with more crimes. So on so many levels, this is a violation of not just regular law, but also international law. And so his lawyers argued that we should be present there when at least present to see what is being taken and who is taking it. So there's some chain of custody, but this is being refused by the Ecuadorian government. The British government's just hands off, not interested, basically. So they're deferring everything to the United States on this issue. So
I was wondering what your views are on this. On Friday, we were mentioning the Chelsea Manning situation and the fact that Chelsea Manning's back in prison for refusing to cooperate with the grand jury, and the circumstances, the penalties that Chelsea Manning is in receipt of here. Do you think that this grab of possessions and documents might give the United States the opportunity to put more pressure on Chelsea Manning, because there might be something in that which refers to her?
Absolutely, absolutely. So maybe this is another reason why this sort of game, cat and mouse game, is being played. As you reported on Friday, Mike, Manning has been detained again under another subpoena from the secret grand jury in Eastern Virginia. And I think you're right to suspect that they're possibly buying time and have a look at Assange's possessions to see if they could maybe fabricate additional charges, either against Manning, Assange, or both. But what they're trying to sell in the U.S. court is a conspiracy charge, conspiracy to commit or invade a computer to take classified information or something along those lines. So it's spurious at best. It's spurious at best. And so I think that's actually what's happening, Mike. I think they're really trying to fabricate a case here. So.
Well, if Julian Assange is possibly to be extradited to Sweden, well, I just want to mention, since we're talking about extradition, David Noakes and Lynn Thayer, who of course continue to be persecuted over their attempts to help people with cancer using GCMAF. Now, David Noakes and Lynn Thayer were at the recent AV10 conference, and they spoke at that, and Ian Crane has decided to break with the usual tradition and to release David's presentation immediately. So that is available on Ian R. Crane's YouTube channel. We would like people to share that as widely as possible, if you could, because Lynn Thayer is due to be extradited to France this coming Wednesday. So there's a certain amount of urgency about this. We want to raise the profile of this case and the situation with Lynn Thayer. And just remember that, of course, she was not prosecuted in this country for any criminal offence with respect to GCMAF because there was no evidence against her, and so they couldn't bring a prosecution. Well, there is no evidence in France either, because Lynn had nothing to do with any of the operations in France. And so why have they issued an arrest warrant? Well, apparently she owns property in France, and that therefore perhaps means that her activities fall under the jurisdiction of France. I think there's plenty to dispute that situation. There's a lot to dispute about the European arrest warrant itself. As I say, she's going to be extradited on Wednesday, so this story needs to get much wider coverage as well. So please support that if you possibly can. Now, Patrick, let's move on to Iran, and the saber rattling continues.
Sure, it does. And if you were watching social media feeds this morning, you might have seen this tweet. It seemed to make it into the international news wires as soon as it was sent out. This is President Donald Trump, and he says, if Iran wants to fight, that will be the official end of Iran. Never threaten the United States again, says POTUS. So this goes down in history as actually one of the most imbecilic, childish tweets ever. And if anybody thinks that this president is playing 5D chess, I have a rude awakening for you. He is playing 1D checkers. Okay, there's no depth whatsoever to this president, as is evident by this ridiculous tweet threatening to annihilate another country For what? Well, let's have a look at some of Trump's past statements. And Syrian girl just happened to pull this one up from the archives. She says, I'll just put this here. President Trump in 2013 said, remember, I predicted a long time ago that President Obama will attack Iran because of his inability to negotiate properly, not skilled, says the president.
Well, he wasn't the president then, of course.
Yeah, exactly. He was Donald Trump, the backseat driver, basically taking pot shots at Obama. And here he is right now, just threatening Iran militarily, threatening to destroy the country. So is he a hypocrite or is he just stupid? We don't know. But then I found this one as well. Again, having a crack at Obama. This is September 2013. He says, remember, I had previously said Obama will someday attack Iran in order to show how tough he is. The irony of it. So this is a president that has zero self-awareness and basically, you know, what can we say? We'll get on to what's shaping this aggressive posture towards Iran, Mike.
Well, indeed. Now, on last night's Sunday Wire, we were talking about various things, and I was asking the question: how much evidence do people need that the regime change operations? There's a narrative built for each one of these. It's the same template that's being used, and people sometimes don't seem to, or at least the public in general doesn't seem to grasp that fact. Mm-hmm. Well, here we have the Four Stooges. And this is a new intelligence threat briefing. I'm asking, is this shades of Iraq? So who have we got here? We have Mike Pompeo, of course, top left. Then we have Acting Defense Secretary Pat Shanahan on the top right, CIA Director Gina Haspel on the bottom left, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Joseph Dunford, General Joseph Dunford in the bottom right. And so what are they up to? Well, they have began a secret intelligence process on the 10th of May. So this began with a visit to the CIA by John Bolton, that lovely man. And he's, of course, been demanding war with Iran since 2004. And so this process began. They decided that they would put an intelligence briefing into the Senate and into the House. They're going to be briefed separately on that tomorrow. Well, what has the response been? That some people have had some kind of foresight of this. This is Mark Warner, the US Senator, saying it's very important that more members hear this story. So we're already getting a dodgy dossier being built here, it seems, Patrick. Here we have another war hawk, Mark Rubio. But if we're attacked by Iran's proxies, we're going to respond against those proxies and hold Iran responsible, he went on to say, and there's going to be a price to pay for that as well. Who could disagree with the notion that if we're attacked, we have the right to defend ourselves and respond?
So that's an important part of the narrative. You talked about a template, Mike. Here, what Rubio is showing here is that if we're attacked by any of Iran's proxies, that could be anybody that they deem to be a proxy or have any support from Iran at all. And
could that include Syria, for example?
It could include Lebanon, Syria, Hezbollah, Iraq, factions within Iraq like the Hashd al-Shabi, Yemen, the Houthis, the Bahraini opposition, the Shiite opposition in Saudi Arabia, the suppressed opposition. Who else could be Iran's proxies? I guess Russia.
It's a long list.
Russia and China, throw them in as well, and why not throw North Korea in there just for good measure? So it could be anybody, basically. So that's the template, the red line. This is very similar to Obama's red line template. If anyone uses chemical weapons on either side, we'll consider that crossing a red line, and we will have license then to bomb or to invade or to sort of launch intervention. So it is the same template, Mike.
So a congressional briefing already given to congressional party leaders on the 16th of May. Tomorrow there's going to be this intelligence briefing given to the Senate and to the House in two separate things. Now, some people, a couple of voices of reason exist. So here's Tulsi Gabbard. The needless escalation of tensions with nuclear armed powers like Russia and China has brought the country, the United States, closer to nuclear war now than in many years. So she was on Face the Nation yesterday. And she said that if she's of course on the presidential campaign, or at least the primary campaign as a Democratic presidential candidate, she said that she would de-escalate those tensions to seek cooperation rather than conflict with other great powers. So she's obviously raising the issue that, of course, if you attack Iran in this way, it's not going to end there. Well, Rand Paul had this to say. He said, I think the most important thing is to put the administration on notice that they do not have congressional permission to go to war with Iran. He said that John Bolton, he was putting his criticism directly at the feet of John Bolton. He said he's a malignant influence on the administration. He said that my concern is that there are people that will overreact to this intelligence and somehow get involved in a military conflict from which there is no turning back. The question is, that's being done in reaction to our increased presence there and our naming of all the Revolutionary Guards as terrorists. Is this a reaction to our policy, or is it simply an aggressive policy saying we're going to start a war? Iran knows you don't start a war with the United States, so he's being quite clear that Iran is not stupid. They're not going to start a war with the US under any circumstances. So if we end up in that position, then he's asking who's actually behind it. Well, perhaps this gives us a clue.
Who is behind it? Who is behind it? So this is an article that was written by Gareth Porter, and this was released a couple of days ago. We actually republished part of this at 21stcenturywide.com. I encourage people to go read this. It's very telling, this article. John Bolton's nefarious plot for war with Iran. And what this reveals is that the so-called intelligence, Mike, that you're talking about, what's actually informing that intelligence briefing, that's an oxymoron, of course.
Yes.
Washington and intelligence, especially Mike Pompeo and intelligence, is certainly an oxymoron. But who's informing it? Senior Israeli national security officials played a key role in creating the alleged intelligence which provided the rationale for people like Mike Pompeo and so forth. And in fact, a statement by Pompeo, Mike, in February, they were addressing the issue of mortars hitting the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, and were basically blaming this on Iranian proxies, okay? Not Al-Qaeda, not various Al-Qaeda affiliates, not ISIS, but Iranian proxies. So who are they referring to when they say Iranian proxies? They're talking about the Hashid, the Hashd al-Shabi. That's the national militia in Iraq. Okay, they're integrated with the Iraqi armed forces. That's by government decree. So what exactly is our Secretary of State talking about? He's talking nonsense. What he's doing and what Marco Rubio and others are doing is trying to use anything, any explosion anywhere as some sort of a pretext to blame Iran, therefore trigger a war that wouldn't have been there otherwise, okay? And their so-called intelligence is coming from the senior levels of the Israeli security apparatus, okay? And it's no secret that this president, more than any other U.S. president, has a bat phone line to Tel Aviv, okay? He, every single bit of his worldview and reality is already pre-digested and emasticated in Tel Aviv, and then is handed on a silver salva to POTUS, which he dutifully repeats. It's either coming from Tel Aviv or from somewhere else in his administration. So that's the problem we have. It's a very dangerous situation that to have a foreign country like Israel dictating U.S. foreign policy. But that's exactly where we're at right now.
Right, well, let's head over to Ukraine then. And, well, good news, or is it? I'm not entirely sure just yet, but Vladimir Zelensky has been sworn in today as president of Ukraine. He pledged to defend the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine with all his deeds and to take care of the welfare of the fatherland and the welfare of the Ukrainian people, and to defend the rights and freedoms of citizens, to observe the Constitution of Ukraine and the laws of Ukraine. So that's all fantastic stuff. I understand one of his first acts was to call for the dissolution of the Ukrainian parliament. Well, we watch with interest what, I mean, obviously he hasn't even sat down in the chair yet, so we don't know what he's going to do exactly, but we're going to watch this with interest over the next few days.
It's a very stressful job, by the way. Go back to that image, Mike, and you can see he's already, just in a few weeks, put on about 10 years. He's looking more like President Poroshenko with every passing day. So this is an extremely stressful job anytime you're in politics, of course. Of course, Donald Trump doesn't look like he's aged a day since he got in, so maybe he's not doing,
well, you know,
he's not under great stress, who knows.
Plastic and fillers can cover up all kinds of
And
evils.
makeup,
Yes. Yes, okay, well, Brexit, of course, continues, and we're starting to head in towards another round of Brexit nonsense in the press. So today, Theresa May rolled out Matt Hancock to do her dirty work for her because she's not able to do it for herself. So there's going to be a vote on the withdrawal agreement bill, another one, the fourth vote on this coming up in the next couple of weeks. Matt Hancock said, if you want to leave the European Union and deliver on the result of the referendum, no matter the details you want to see in the terms of the future relationship, you need to vote for legislation and then have the debate in committee stages later on exactly what the details are. So you've got to buy into the thing before you know what you're buying into. That's the message strongly from Matt Hancock. So MPs should back this no matter what the details might be in the future. Don't worry about it at all. He said, no doubt there will be votes on really big issues on whether you have to have a people's voice or not, or people's vote, sorry, or not, or whether to have a customs union, both of which he's against. So that's fantastic stuff. Well, the Telegraph pushed this out this morning under the headline, Theresa May's bold Brexit offer is just a retread of old ideas, leaked document suggests. So the Telegraph claiming to have received a leaked copy of the new deal that she's going to put on the table, because apparently for this fourth vote, it's going to be brand new with a completely different way of going about it. It's not going to be the same at all. It's what they're trying to convince everybody of. Nobody quite falling for it just yet. And in fact, David Davis not falling for it because his response is he's going to vote against the fourth meaningful vote. Of course, he's a member of the ERG, but of course he knows a lot about EU Defence Union as well. So just keep that in mind as well. But we have an exclusive, Patrick. We have an exclusive because apparently political parties influence elections.
Wow, wow.
Did you know that?
That is a pretty shocking development, actually. I'm wondering who unearthed this revelation, Mike?
Well, it's apparently Gordon Brown. So he's giving a speech in Glasgow today, and he's saying this: democracy is fatally undermined if unexplained, unreported, and thus undeclared campaign finance is being used to influence the very elections at the heart of our democratic system. So what's he worried about? This is actually a massive reaction to the Brexit Party, which seems to be gathering momentum.
I thought he was talking about Conservative Friends of Israel, or BICOM.
Or Labour Friends of Israel could equally be.
Or Labour Friends of Israel.
Absolutely.
Oh, so he's talking about the Brexit Party.
Oh, he is.
Oh, okay. So we're on. Okay, it's Brexit. I got it.
He said now he is saying today, now Mr. Farage leads a new Brexit Party which is making questionable claims about the true source of its funding at a time when the Electoral Commission has warned of the dangers of multiple small anonymous donations being a cover for dirty money. So now, Patrick, if you want to run a political party and you're a popular party and you're getting multiple small anonymous donations, this is
like
a problem.
£5-10,
yeah,
right?
£5 or £10,
20
whatever,
quid.
20 quid.
So is Gordon Brown's conspiracy theory, which he is floating out here, is that there are bots that are giving small donations to the Brexit Party, not actual people. But yet the polls show that the nation has shifted behind the Brexit Party, right? So there are lots of people who support it, right?
Well, this
according to the polls. So that is a problem here between Gordon Brown's sketch of reality and what we're seeing in sort of even in the mainstream media that's admitting that they're achieving 30 percentiles popular vote share nationally.
Well, that may be the case, but here is one mainstream media outlet, The Independent, which wants to absolutely reinforce what Brown is saying. Brexit Party's Twitter followers raise questions for researchers. So what these guys are saying, is that basically if you look at the type of followers that the Brexit Party has, that some of these followers are pretty prolific. They're claiming that some of these accounts are pushing out 250 tweets a day.
Including retweets. They always include retweets in the stats, Mike.
Absolutely.
How long does it take to retweet? Millisecond, right? I know people that tweet 200 times a day, actually. Quite a few real people.
Well,
so it's not like it doesn't happen, basically.
Well, exactly, yeah. But anyway, they're claiming that the Brexit Party's followers are bots, it seems. And of course, towards the end of this short little article, the R word is used.
Ah, the Russians.
Russia.
The Russians, that's what's behind it.
So
that's what's behind it.
So there you go.
Yes.
I suspect that that's what's behind Gordon Brown and this. We're starting to have a narrative being built that the Brexit Party is being supported by the Russians, and should the result of the European elections at the end of this week, which of course are being thought of by many people as a proxy second referendum, should that go to an even harder Brexit position, then the narrative is almost already there to explain it.
It has to be the Russians.
Absolutely.
It can't be the British people who voted. It has to be the Russians, right? Has to be. People don't veer from the two-party system. They never. It's impossible. It's Boris and Natasha.
Must be.
Boris and Natasha.
We'll be coming on to the Russians a bit later again, I think. But okay, now, last week we mentioned this, that we've been talking about the Sahel region in Africa for quite a few weeks now, since the Munich Defence Conference, whenever Ursula von der Leyen and Tony Blair were both basically reading from the same script, telling us how important the Sahel group of countries is for the EU. Well, a couple of days ago, Jonathan Allen, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations for the United Kingdom, was speaking at the UN, and indeed he was talking about the Sahel countries, absolutely very keen to get behind the EU on this. This is what he said: continuing the close cooperation with the EU is a vital step in aiding operational efforts. And what's he talking about? Well, it's defence union, of course. They've contributed. So the UK, he said, has contributed to the European Union's package of support and provided further bilateral contributions, for which the joint force alone totals around $20 million. That's set against a far bigger contribution for the Sahel as a whole, and not to be outdone by some permanent representative to the United Nations. The Foreign Secretary himself was in Ghana, in fact, to make an agreement there. This is part of a one-week working tour, so this is the Right Honourable Jeremy Hunt, third from the left there. He said that really UK's investment in Ghana, about £3.4 billion pounds, yes, and he's called for more collaboration and support on security, especially issues of border security, crime and cybersecurity. So we are heading in there not to solve any issues of poverty or development, which perhaps China and the Belt and Road are doing. But we're there to make sure that these countries have proper border security and so on. We can't secure our own borders, but we're going to secure theirs for them.
Using electronic technology that we'll hopefully sell to them, right?
Well, yes, but that's absolutely true. But the key point here is that all of a sudden, in the last 6 months, the Sahel group of countries has become a major area of interest for the EU, for Britain, but mainly because of the EU. And why is that? Because this is not an area that NATO is traditionally active in, and therefore the EU needs a unified defence in order to meet that problem.
And untapped resources, Mike. Untapped resources in the Sahel region. And coincidentally, and we remind people that this is one of the band of countries that China is heavily invested in.
Right.
And China is also looking at the Sahel countries as a potential breadbasket for a growing Chinese socioeconomic powerhouse over the next 2 decades. So is it possible, Mike, that we might see a conflict there between the EU unified defense forces and possibly China?
I think it's increasingly looking that way.
Or NATO from the Europe side?
It won't be NATO, because Europe has made it clear this is not an area for NATO. This is for them. So
this is okay.
So
that'll be the first big foray, I think, for the EU Defence Union.
Absolutely.
So interesting.
Absolutely. Now, we've been talking for quite some time about the silence, the public silence from UK parliamentarians on the issue of European Defence Union, but they haven't been entirely silent in Parliament itself. Although they're not talking about this publicly, they have asked some written questions. And so David Scott has collated some of these, written an article around it. It's a fantastic article, and we would like to ask you to promote this article as much as possible. The feedback on the UK Column forums has been extremely positive. So the article is called European Defence Union Parliamentary Written Questions. Have a read at it. David lists the questions that have been asked, the responses that have been given, and then he gives a little bit of analysis from the government responses to that. Please send that around if you possibly can. Now let's move on to Syria and the delightful, the lovely Karen Pierce.
Such a fetching hand-painted jacket there. Is that a Deutsche Gabbana?
I couldn't comment, but she was speaking in the United Nations Security Council as usual on Friday, and well, she said this, as we've heard, the regime, that's the Syrian regime, the Syrian government, in other words, offensive in northwest Syria has left 180,000 people displaced since the 28th of April alone, and many killed and wounded. Since that date, at least 18 health facilities, including 9 primary healthcare centres, 9 hospitals and 17 schools have been hit by airstrikes. That's a clear violation of SCR 2286 and international humanitarian law.
I just want to pause, Mike. Where is she getting the information about all these hospitals and health centers being supposedly targeted by the evil Assad regime and the evil Russians?
Well, I'm sure it's all coming from the White Helmets.
From the White Helmets, the Syrian Network for Human Rights, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, and the rebels, which ostensibly are Al-Qaeda in Syria. So these are the sources that the British officials are getting their data from, Mike. Is that biased? Is that reliable? Is it factual? Have any of these UN spokespeople ever lied publicly from their position in the last couple of years? Many times, in fact. Mm-hmm. So I think this is just another one of those, Mike.
Well, she went on to say, Mr. President, Russia has claimed that its so-called retaliatory strikes in support of the regime were surgical, I quote, surgical in their precision. Mr. President, I hope I do not need medical treatment in Moscow if surgical accuracy means what we've seen on the ground in Idlib. And she whispered, most of the media didn't catch this, but I caught it. She whispered, shh, don't mention Mosul or Raqqa. Because the hypocrisy, Patrick, is absolutely spectacular. If you consider the so-called surgical strikes in Mosul or Raqqa that were there to clear out ISIS, allegedly, because many, many civilians were killed and injured with British-backed, US-backed operations to clear out ISIS in those two places.
Thousands and thousands of civilians, in fact. And I might add that the United States was intentionally downplaying civilian casualties for years, and some of this was recently sort of unearthed by a number of independent organizations, including Air Wars, but this was also serialized. Even Amnesty International had to call it out. It was so obvious, Mike.
It is staggering, and we did suggest that this would probably be the case a couple of weeks ago, Patrick, but the same old narratives that we heard from Aleppo coming out again, health facilities, schools hit by airstrikes. Undoubtedly, in the not too distant future, we're going to hear something about chemical weapons.
Chemical weapons, wow. There's a subject that came up this week. The OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, based in The Hague, Netherlands. Well, they were in the news this week, Mike. Well, some of the news, but not all of the news. There was a leak of sorts, and this leak was a part of the report, the final fact-finding mission report. It seemed to have belonged in that report, but somehow didn't make it into the official report. However, it did make it into the hands of the Working Group on Syria, Media, and Propaganda. And of course, one of the leading members of that group has been a guest on this program many times, and also on our Sunday Wire program. His name is Dr. Piers Robinson. We did speak to him at length on yesterday's Sunday Wire about this. We had an extensive Q&A session. I do encourage people for really in-depth analysis to go and look at the Sunday Wire interview last night with Piers Robinson. It's extremely informative if you want to drill down into what this really means. But we'll give you a quick summary of it right now. What was this report? This looked like a secondary engineering report, Mike. And this assessment is up on the working group's website right now, but the engineering sub-team of the OPCW's fact-finding mission had some doubts, apparently, Mike, about the official story that was put forward in the official narrative that was put forward. And of course, any good investigation is going to look at alternative hypotheses. And they would take on evidence that maybe doesn't fit a predetermined conclusion, and this is what a good investigation does, a forensic investigation. Unfortunately, that isn't what happened with the official OPCW report. It was a very unusual report. Not only that, Mike, it wasn't even signed off by anybody. So apparently, all the members of the team were so not confident with this report that nobody wanted to put their names on it, which a red flag should have gone up straight away. But let's look at some of the findings of this report here. So what they first wanted to identify here, there's clearly a cover-up of key information. That's the number one point that we learned from this leak to the working group. And the other point, well, we'll start off with some of the actual forensic findings. There was problems with this blast fragmentation analysis in the first report. What are we talking about in terms of blast fragmentation? Well, here is one example of that. And if you do look in the report and you look at some of the examples here, this is one figure. And the so-called gas cylinder, the chlorine cylinder that landed on one of the rooftops, I'll show you in a second. But this here is a hole that looks identical to the alleged chlorine cylinder strike in the roof. And this is on a next door adjacent building, Mike. Now, a normal person would look at this and say, well, the two holes look the same, so they're probably both from mortar fire. Well, those conclusions weren't the ones that were drawn by the official sources and by the likes of Bellingcat. So here is the other bit here, the magic cylinders. Now, we covered the magic cylinders. Let's look at both of these magic cylinders. Well, here's the first one that landed on a bed somehow in relatively mint condition. Was supposed to have crashed through the roof, but yet its tail fins are in perfect condition, and the bed's not in bad condition, considering this massive steel cylinder fell from many hundreds of meters, supposedly from a helicopter. Anyway, it's hard to believe that this fell on the floor and then jumped up and traveled sideways and landed on the bed, just like a randy yellow cylinder. So let's look at the other magic cylinder. This is the interesting one here. Same hole as we showed you before, right there. But this cylinder somehow came down from hundreds of meters, made the hole, and then reversed itself out onto, have a rest off to the side. Because that's what magic cylinders do, Mike. They do incredible things. So the leaked report actually questioned all of this, but it was left out of the final report. So this is why this is a significant leak. Now, let's go a little bit further. There's the hole, of course, in question there. I mean, this is unbelievable stuff. Who would believe that the official story, that somehow this is one of the gas cylinders, hit there, reversed out, and then unloaded its gas payload, which traveled three stories down to the basement, where it immediately killed 43 people that had locked themselves into a room, even though they weren't exposed initially to any chemical substances. So, and mind you, there's no sarin found on site. And there's doubt expressed about whether the victims, supposed victims, were killed by chlorine, and also the time of death as well is undetermined. Or so is the cause of death of the victim. So the whole thing is falling to pieces, basically. So here we'll look at the final summary here: cover-up of key information omitted, blast fragmentation analysis. Magic cylinders, evidence points to a staged attack. This is also backed up by other people's reporting, which you've gone into detail on this program before. The BBC producer who also expressed doubt about this too. And then a pattern of wider deception. And this is the real problem, Mike. Are we looking at a pattern of wider deception? Are we looking at, if this has been staged and governments have fabricated a case and then used that as a pretext to launch missile strikes against a UN member state like Syria, on this chemical weapons attack, were other ones also staged? And the media in the West are complicit. They seem to be involved in the cover-up. Media outlets that are attacking anybody, asking questions. I'm talking about the Huffington Post UK and their writer Chris York, who's aggressively hunting down and attacking anybody who's asking any questions publicly about this report. And now we have the evidence. So the Duma hoax has fallen apart, Mike. That's the main conclusion that we can draw from this recently leaked report. I mean, there's nothing to really hold this story together anymore. It's completely staged. Not only that, there's an active cover-up to keep the public from knowing the truth. This is what we've learned. So just taking this a little further, what this has triggered are a number of celebrities have spoken out as well. And we'll take a look at some of those. Recently, Roger Waters, famous musician, Hollywood actress Susan Sarandon, who's also very active in politics, and Pamela Anderson have all basically questioned or alluded to this on social media, that there's a problem with the official story. So they're reading the working group's analysis, Mike. So what's the result of this? They're all getting smeared and attacked, basically. Let's look at who's doing some of the smearing. So Susan Sarandon's asking questions here. She's saying, this is really important. Why aren't we talking about this, she said. And the establishment gatekeeper is stepping in here. Her name is Janine Di Giovanni. She says, to Sarandon, she says, you're a talented actress. You're terribly naive on foreign policy. This is a conspiracy theorist writing that you're backing. You're on the wrong side, honey. Do some reading of Assad's war crimes. This is Janine Di Giovanni. She is one of the establishment's team of gatekeepers that seem to be networked along with some of the people we mentioned earlier as well. And you can see who she's tagged on her tweet. That's part of the network of, you could call them trolls, gatekeepers. So let's look at this woman. Who is she? Who is this expert? Here she is, and this alluring photograph here of this star-studded journalist, Janine Di Giovanni, award-winning author, journalist, foreign policy analyst, and professor at Yale. She is a senior fellow at Yale in the Jackson Institute for Global Affairs, not to be confused with the Henry Jackson Society, or not. I'm not sure if they're both named after Scoop Jackson or not, probably not. So she teaches on human rights and so forth. So she's won lots of awards. But it's funny, Mike, that one of the outlets that she does appear regularly on is this outlet, CNN. That is probably one of the most egregious fake news broadcast outlets in America. They've been caught red-handed fabricating reports and fake news, fake incidents in Syria. Caught red-handed on film. We have shown you the evidence of this on past episodes, but Vanessa Beeley also exposed this in her film, The Veto. So that's who Janine Di Giovanni is affiliated with, a network that produces and fabricates reports in Syria. So she's then chastising Susan Sarandon for being a conspiracy theorist or reading conspiracy theorists. So clearly, Mike, panic has set in amongst the establishment. They don't know what to do. And I'm looking for mainstream media coverage about this leak, Mike. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. There's only one outlet where you can find any coverage at all in the Western mainstream media, and it's this outlet, Peter Hitchens' blog. And this is, I believe, the Mail on Sunday?
Yes.
So this is what Peter's blog has to say, and I do encourage people to go and check it out if they can. The document written by one of the OPCW's most experienced investigators shows that it is highly unlikely that gas canisters found at the scene of an alleged poison gas attack in Douma, Syria, were actually dropped from helicopters, as has been widely believed and claimed. The claim is crucial to the case for bombing Syria. So that's what's in Peter Hitchens' blog. Now, it's fantastic, Mike, that Peter Hitchens has reported on this, but he is the only one. So this actually reinforces what Piers Robinson says, that there is this kind of overarching deception and a cover-up, as it were. So you have the segregation in media. You have alternative media, the likes of RT, and independent people on social media, experts, analysts, and so forth. You know, like the ones who we interview on this show and other shows. And then you have the mainstream over here, and there's nothing. They're not even opposing this leak. They're not even trying to shoot it down. What does that tell you?
They don't want to draw any attention to it whatsoever, is what it tells me.
So it's better for them to say absolutely nothing,
Yeah.
and then let Brexit and other things sort of carry away the news cycle. Incredible. So that's how our media works, ladies and gentlemen. This is a perfect example, a perfect case study of propaganda and omission. So this leads us, Mike, to ask a really important question. Now that the OPCW official Duma story has collapsed, the Duma hoax has been exposed, we have to ask the question, does that mean that Elliot Higgins of Bellingcat is the Christopher Steele of chemical weapons? This is the big question. There's the dashing former MI6 agent there, Christopher Steele. And so we're asking that question, that inverted question, is Elliot Higgins the Christopher Steele of chemical weapons? It's a fair question, isn't it?
That is a very fair question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say we're right out of time, so it's a good question to end that on. Maybe we will have a discussion on how we answer that question during the extra time segment in a few minutes. But thank you very much for joining me today, Patrick, and thank you for joining us. We will be back at the same time, 1 p.m. as usual on Wednesday. We will see you then. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.